Ontario perspective. We are the backbone that connects all of the major universities, all of the colleges, about half the school boards in Ontario, the research hospitals, innovation institutes, cancer research, genomics research, those type of organizations. So we've been around for 13 years, funded originally by the Ontario government to help set up some fiber network, 20-year IRU across the province. We're halfway through that IRU now. And we have grown the network over the course of time from originally about 4,000 kilometers up to 6,000 kilometers of optical fiber. Currently 32 points of presence across the province. Trying to provide ubiquitous access, equal access. It's all 100 gig ready network across the entire network, and we've got some core sections that are actually operating and running at 100 gig. Which we were the first in Canada to do with support from CANHEIT and helping build some of that infrastructure. And the first research and education network in the world actually run at 100 gig. For those that don't know, 100 gig is 100,000 iTunes in a minute. That's how fast we can download stuff. So it's pretty fast for our researchers. So that's the landscape we work in. We connect out through CANHEIT. We actually support CANHEIT in some of our infrastructure, and we also connect out to our sister organizations out west and into Quebec, and also in the United States, Michigan, and into New York. So we're a self-sustaining not-for-profit. We primarily are funded by our user fees of our connection institutes, which are about 110 of them, funding us. We don't get Ontario government funding since the initial setup 10 years ago. We have 6,000 kilometers of optical fiber. 2 million researchers, students across the province use our network every single day. Most of them don't even know it, right? So it's like the light switch. When the light switch goes on, it all works. Of course, when the light switch goes off, we hear about it, right? So that's because everyone's in the dark. So it's a pretty big challenge in that regard. We had a private study done by KPMG a couple years ago, looking at what is the impact from ORION standpoint, this not-for-profit infrastructure, indirect impact on the Ontario landscape. And it was estimated about $140 million annually to the GDP of Ontario, which is a pretty significant impact, given that our operational budget's about $4.2 million a year. Pretty significant impact, and about 2,000 jobs a year depend directly on the ORION network. Again, run at 100 gigabits per second. We're testing with Alcatel-Lucent probably in about a month's time, 400 gigabits per second, along 200 kilometers stretch. So it's a really great test bed for testing new technologies as we move along. For us, because of our infrastructure, we just plug 2 cards in and out, and we get to test new stuff. It's kind of cool. Our network utilization is growing at 50% per year, and that's just organic growth. Just use of the network, which is faster than the internet use of the internet's growing. So, and we try to do that at costs less than 3% per year increase. So pretty good deal, when you can, double your use in about 3 years and only have about 6-7% increase in your actual costs. So it's pretty well structured using this asset. If we look at our member organizations, currently have 107, 110, I think, as today. We break them down and we can see we have this sort of equal set of groups. Universities in Ontario, we have our colleges, our K-12 sector, and our research and hospitals. And I include in there high-performance computing, all of our major research hospitals connected, as well as Brain Institute, cancer research, genomics research. So that falls in the general research side. So we actually have this sort of equal division by our groups. We actually look at our revenue, 4.1 million last year. It's also equal. So it's pretty well matched, which is interesting challenge. Now, how do you match these disparate groups and their disparate uses to the network and the costs of supporting it? So in essence, the benefit across the board to our organizations is pretty equal. And if we look at the bandwidth side of things, universities take about a third, the colleges a third, K-12 is growing, and our research and hospitals is about 11% on the utilization. So that gives you sort of a flavor of the 4 equal groups across again. So when I talk about colleges, universities, K-12, and research, those are sort of the sections throughout the presentation. So we are part of this national network, and just a quick slide I put up from Canary. We've got some major players in the province, RISC in Quebec, Siberia in Alberta, BCNet in British Columbia, but we also have other partners with logos. We have to get a better picture here with logos and stuff. We've got some of them represented here, in fact, today. So we've got Saskatchewan and Manitoba, Atlantic provinces, each have their own network as well in the territories. So from each one of us, our perspectives is that we manage the province and all the connectivity of the institutions to our own networks in those provinces. And then we collaborate through Canary to interconnect right across the country. And Canary on our behalf interacts with the international landscape. So from a countrywide initiative to a countrywide initiative internationally. Canary, of course, is funded directly from the federal government, Industry Canada, but each of our institutions across the country all funded differently. Some of them are 100% provincial funded, some of them are 100% membership, like ourselves, and then there's a mix in between. So it's a rather interesting landscape, and a lot of our organizations, my sister organizations, are represented here, and we've got several meetings all the time. So we use CANHEIT as one of our launching pads to get everybody together and talk. How does our network actually used? So if I look at the division, about a third of it's paid internet. That is, our institutions connecting with a provider and they transfer internet use over top of our network. So that's about a third. Equally important is what we call peering, private peering or settlement-free peering. With our arrangements from an ORION standpoint of being involved with the Torix right on Toronto Front Street, the major telecommunication hub in Canada, and our relationship with the telecommunication providers, we're able to put in deals there in which we can reroute a lot of the traffic directly through our network onto those peering arrangements, and basically cuts the internet costs in half of our institutions with the direct peering. So it doesn't go through your net service provider, it goes through us. And our sister organizations across the country also have similar arrangements, and Canary, of course, is providing a peering structure for those that don't have it. And then internal R&E, which is just pure research and education traffic, that just stays in Ontario, about 20% of our traffic. And then about 11% of our traffic goes out of Ontario, either through Canary or directly to the United States through our connections that we have in the United States. So that's sort of the breakdown. The interesting picture is the bottom one, which is our growth chart over, as you can see, variety of quarters there. The total just keeps going up, right? It's got this little exponential curve. We have a couple little dips where things get realigned, but you can see that it paid internet and peering is growing. Our internal R&E is growing. Our external R&E both staying the same across the period of time. But you can see again that growth curve that's happening at 50% growth per year. And we expect that to take off as we talk about extreme data and other activities I'll allude to as we're moving forward. We put in a really interesting network tool called OPNET just recently, about 4 months ago, and we can actually look at all the slices of all the traffic, where it's going and where it's coming from, specific IP addresses, and we can help produce wonderful color reports. And in fact, we're working with our member institutions on what type of reports they want and the use of the tool to help them manage the network and where things are going. On this particular day, which was the April 29th to 30th, as you can see, a lot of the traffic on the day is internet traffic with some secure traffic making another 18% or so. We can break it down from our Google, one of our great partners, GTANet, which represents Greater Toronto Region, the major research institutes in Toronto, which are represented here today. In fact, great to see them in the audience. And part of that is University of Toronto, so we can take GTANet as a break as a whole and then separate out that section there. Our connection with Canary, et cetera, all the way through. So we can take a look at that and slice it all down on any particular day or time, and that can be inbound or outbound traffic. Again, from the university standpoint, here's over the course of the last 4 months, traffic from the major institutions and groups of institutions as it flows through. We can track all that. You can see the weekly traffic and where the weekends happen, right? So you can see where students obviously aren't there on the weekends, and we can see where that's happening. We can also see, we started tracking specifically Google traffic. See this plume here? That's Google traffic itself on the network. Pretty remarkable to see that pop out when we were breaking it out. We also have, with Google themselves, we have a peering arrangement. We have basically 20 gigabits of connection directly with Google for a peering arrangement, and putting in cache, et cetera, in Ontario, and working with our other partners in Toronto and London and Windsor, putting Google caches strategically to help back up each other. So yeah, Google's one of the big providers, and we look at that that traffic again. It's very, very common where you see the peaks during a particular day, as it's we start to get just after in the mid-afternoon, I think, is where the peaks start to happen, and then it falls off at the end of the day, and of course weekends. I think the 29th was a holiday, I think. Trying to remember, so we can track all of that. So peering partners. So ORION has, peering, as I said, about 33% of our traffic. We peer with 47 different providers. Here's some of the top ones that we work with, that traffic goes directly from us to them and not through the internet provider. As I said, cuts the costs in half, and it's all done through TFS. So we put all sorts of partners in place, all the way through from Bell providing internet traffic, Akamai as well, Desire to Learn, content provider, selected by the Ontario government as the content provider for K-12. Some of the universities are using Desire to Learn as setting up structures for content delivery for online education as well. High performance computing is a really important element. About 7% of our traffic is directly related to that in Ontario. 3 academic partners, SharkNet in Southern Ontario and up into Sudbury and North Bay. High performance computing virtual laboratory in the eastern part of the province, and of course then you've got SciNet, right, the huge U of T facility on the network, either directly through us or working with our partners and enabling all of that capability to be used by our researchers across the province. A lot of institutions engaged in this. High performance computing is recognized in Ontario as one of the key elements moving forward strategically for growth. Mirroring some of this, of course, is all of the health research in high performance computing in Ontario. Some of the research institutions I mentioned, University Health Network, Sick Kids Hospital, which is almost equal to the academic side. So that all is hidden on this map as well. And so Ontario is putting its arms around how do we strategically support that? Much like Compute Canada, you probably heard of Compute Canada, trying to put a Compute Ontario in place, although it won't be called that. And how do we from ORION support that set of institutions in providing the backbone they need, especially with the growth of cloud computing capability, but also from a data structure standpoint. So those are some of the challenges we have to look forward to. So, all sorts of things happen all over the network. We've got projects in the colleges in Niagara doing vineyard monitoring, where they put sensors on every single vine and determining the temperature and the water levels on every single vine. It can map the flow of a fog moving over a vineyard and what they need to do with regards to that, where the dry areas are. High definition streaming between us and through Canary down across the United States, across the Pacific Ocean to New Zealand. A lot of international consortium of over 250 research institutions looking at virals, and that was part of the SARS, when there was a big SARS outbreak, use of the ORION network for that. And the Atlas Higgs boson discovery, a lot of research done in Toronto, but connected out through to British Columbia, as well as out through to Europe. So those are the type of traffic that goes on our network. Some of these big research projects, but also little tiny ones. And some of the really recent, really small things. Savvy is a project at U of T looking at how do we look at smart applications in a virtual integrated wireless backbone architecture. So we're helping a specific research project there. A phenomenal little high school student working on some research at, I think it was Sick Kids Hospital or UHN, cystic fibrosis, digital media activities, even helping other countries because of our infrastructure we put in place for 100 gigabits per second. Other countries are interested. What were the lessons learned? They want to put infrastructure in place. How do we help them along with those things? And video conferencing, engaged in a lot of that growth where the future potential is on not just standard video conferencing, but immersion of and what the bandwidth that means moving forward. One of the interesting tools we have also as part of this supporting the research initiatives is called O3 at ORION. And O3 is, there are 3 O's in collaboration, so we call it O3. It's really a cloud-based tool that enables collections of researchers or students to put together their own sort of community and share information, whether it's data repositories, wikis, blogs, all in a secure fashion. It's cross-institution, sometimes it's within institutions. Sheridan College is using it specifically for the whole digital media aspect. So it's a really simple tool that can kickstart and these small communities. And we've grown to over 4,000 members across the province with 80 different types of communities, all the way from in-classroom learning all the way to managing some really important research and activities going on. So it's a really interesting tool. And we're working with our provider, Igloo, which is a small startup out of Waterloo, in providing some of that capability to build those networks, so community networks. Last year, we've had some interesting activities go on. Working with Bell. As I said, we're in our last 10 years, so the original funding of the Ontario government sort of set us up for the first 10 years. We've been on our own for about 6 years now, but what's happening in the next 10 years? So we worked with Bell and provided a maintenance agreement across our network for the next 10 years. Rogers, we've been looking at the last mile problem. We have an agreement in place with Rogers for helping us with preferred pricing on last mile connectivity from our institutions to our POPs. Working with the Hydro One Telecom and a support agreement. They're part of the infrastructure in Ontario. Canary user fees, we all know the challenges that we all faced this year with Canary user fees. And we, from an ORION perspective, are working with the universities, both the CIOs, VPs of research, but also the colleges and K-12 who are also potentially affected by this, and helping bring awareness to Canary of the impact of the user fees in Ontario. About $1.5 million invested in our network replacements and upgrades, capacity redundancy, constantly evolving directly into the network and supporting that. And that's not people, that's just direct capital expenditure on the network every year. Toronto Front Street, a major upgrade. You can imagine 151 Front Street is this major hub of telecommunications in Ontario. If you ever want to take out Ontario's economy, there's one place you can look, by the way. So we're a major player there, and we've constantly upgrading the capacity and capability and connectivity there. OPNET monitoring tool, which we showed you, and putting in a complete NOC network upgrade monitoring center for that. Lots of conferences and workshops and outreach to our community. The high performance computing, engaging the health networks, K-12, tech workshops, and our major Think conference, where we bring together our top 200 basically C and D of our member organizations, C and D levels, directors and CIOs and CFOs, et cetera, together and talk about what are the challenges they're faced with. And in fact, this year we talked about extreme data and their feedback on extreme data, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then high performance research, computing high research Ontario, which I talked a bit about as well. So as you can see, ORION is actually more than just an ISP, right? So a lot of traffic is internet related, but we're much more than an ISP in this community, as are our sister organizations. Sure, again, internet is a major important component, but it goes beyond all of that. And here are just some of the things that we work with, right? From our standpoint, we have a very diverse ecosystem. So our organization tries to rally and find the commonality in that ecosystem. We're dependable, reliable, 99.99% uptime across the province. Redundant paths, all those things, constantly looking where we can improve. Got one of the fastest networks in the world. We advocate with, small organization, 20 people. We work with 7 government ministries on all the Ontario government activities that can go on. training colleges and universities, e-health, economic development, research and innovation, the Premier's office, government services. It's an amazing coordination effort that has to go on from our perspective with all of our stakeholders. A lot of coordination, particularly Canary Fees was a great example in trying to rally organizations together that exist or that don't exist, and we have to rally them together to help move forward. We support technical expertise in all of our institutions. We work very collaboratively with the major universities, but also from the other institutions that aren't as strong. We provide a lot of technical support. Unique platform for our researchers to, do dedicated light waves across or dedicated bandwidth to allow them to do some experiments across the network that they otherwise could probably never afford or never set up with the commercial enterprises. Very cost-effective network. As I said, we run this whole network, $4.1 million last year, right? And 6,000 kilometers of optical fiber. Organizations, Bell, Hydro One, Rogers walk in and say, oh my God, how do you manage to do that? We look for better deals from our vendors. And again, from a not-for-profit standpoint, we're putting our users first. That's what matters from an organization, not what's the bottom line going to look like. So when this past year, we were out saying, okay, here's what we're doing. We're engaging in all these different ways, providing services. What do you want from a network? These are the type of questions that came back. And probably every one of you, you're all familiar with those type of things that come back from a network. And those are the top 10 that came back from all of our discussions in our community. So what do people want from a network? They want everything, right? That's basically it, right? It's the lifeblood of what goes on in the research and education and innovation landscape. So how do we break down the word everything? Like from our standpoint, how do we start from an ORION, take all that feedback and provide some structure to that? So we looked at this and we call it the 5 C's, so the convergence of what's happening in the space. And I'm going to go through each one of them very quickly. So connectivity. The future, what does it hold? As I said, 400 gigabits per second. We'll probably be testing terabit per second within a year. What are the last mile issues, challenges? Big costs, right? So you can imagine what people spend on ORION, our institutions spend on ORION for the backbone. What they spend on last mile costs is also significant, right? So how do we help them with those costs? How do we look at wireless as part of that community? Bring your own device. What does that mean as an impact? Helping increase the regional footprint through working with municipalities, right? It's not just about the research aspects. Universities are part of a community, and how do we help grow the community? We've been involved with iCanada initiatives on smart communities in Ontario and helping grow. And how do we continue to improve the reliability and redundancy? We just had an outage this week in Oakville. One of the rarest occasions in which Oakville got cut on both sides of it. So our redundant path went down. Like, it's so rare that happens. How do we deal with it? How do we provide for that? How do we work with our institutions to resolve those issues? Computing. So we talked about high performance computing as major backbone. Where is cloud computing going? Bring your own device, right? That's a computing device, and the expectations of users, students, for online learning and experiential learning, right? That's part of the computing demand, which also impacts capacity, et cetera. But how do you take and imagine 5 years from now that high school students would have access to some of the great computing power we've got in Ontario? How do we use a VCL environment, that Ottawa U and Carleton and Western have got? How do we leverage some of that, not just for one institution, but across institutions? Again, connectivity has a play in here, and that's the perspective that ORION's looking at. Data centers. We'll talk about data, but there's no question that one of the challenges with data is your current location, but how do you share resources, backup, disaster recovery, offline? How do you've got high performance computing and everyone's talking, how do you match the data use when you can use cores and bring down cores whenever you want, wherever you want in the cloud, but where's my data, right? How do you manage that data and transmit that data around? Remember, that's got to be transmitted everywhere. Again, it's got to be an issue with regards to communications. Cloud, everybody knows about cloud and all the challenges, and we'll talk a little bit more about that with ORION. But some great opportunities in cloud. I was at an IBM session a week and a half ago, and they, it was brought up that within 3 years, 90% of the companies in North America will be using some form of cloud. 90%. Doesn't mean you're doing all your operations, but you're using some form or another, right? So it's part of the solution. If you look at high performance computing, you're not using the resource at your facility, you're using it somewhere else. Well, that's a cloud-like environment. And what does that mean for challenges and as we move forward? So from Orion's perspective, cloud's playing an important part, particularly from an application side, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Collaboration, that's the final C in this, is you can't do it alone anymore. If there's one message, is everyone's got to be part of this partnership, and it's a complex space. It's not just the networking side, but it's the institution side. How do we rally everybody together to start using and sharing resources, the limited dollars that we have, particularly in Ontario, right? Ontario perspective, let's hope it doesn't happen. Let's hope we don't turn into Greece, right? And we're all worried that something like that can happen. We need to start to learn to be smarter with the less we have, and how we at Orion are trying to help leverage the assets that's there on behalf of Ontario to help other players make that happen. It's not an easy task because there's a lot of organizations and individuals and groups, there's still the researcher that wants to hug their server, right? How do you get them out of that mindset and share resources that they can help others and others can help them, all the way through to, protecting your piece of the funding pie, right? I'm a believer of let's not grow my individual piece of the pie. How do we grow the pie? If we can grow the pie and be more effective, then we can all get a bigger piece. And that's the way I'm trying to look at it in this perspective. Not without challenges, but and we have to, from an Orion standpoint, it's, for our perspective, it's more noble than greed, right? That's the not-for-profit approach, and we really take that to heart, what we do. Data is going to drive all of where our future is when we listen to all the users and everything. If you're involved in any one of those things on the left-hand side, whether it's from an institutional standpoint, a research standpoint, or even a municipality who's got companies doing those things, it's going to drive this extreme data wave. And all the issues you've got to address with are on the other side. Very, very complex issues, and I know a lot of people have talked about them at the conference this year and all the aspects here, but we've got to look at that, and that's pretty frightening, and doing it alone. How do we rally the organizations around? And we tried to do that starting point from Orion, all the way from K to 12, all the way through to the universities, that entire cycle. And we brought, as I said, 200 people together. One of them was a principal, and the principal said, he wrote a little blog, and he said, in the first 10 minutes, I didn't understand any of this from coming to the conference. I didn't know why I was here, right? I don't know the challenges of what we were talking about in extreme data. And he said, within 30 minutes, I got why I was here, because it's going to impact my school, right? And he's it was grade 8 public school teacher, principal. And he said, here's the reason why. Because students are bringing their own device. They need to have connectivity. They need an online learning experience. How is my school going to be judged by students inside the school and outside the school on how I handle this problem? If I don't handle the problem well, my school is judged really badly in the community, and students won't come here. That changes how he's perceived from his school board standpoint. He knew within 30 minutes he had to be there because he was actually learning about a challenge he didn't know about. So that's part of our initiative, is this awareness of all the driving factors and all the issues that have to handle. And the reason I say it's actually an extreme data wave, if you look at the red part here, this is actually Orion's data usage. The 70 is where we are today. We handle 70 terabytes of data a day on our network. That's where we are today. On our estimations on how the traffic is growing, that's where the peak is going to be in 5 years from now. And we have to be prepared for that, because it takes time to put infrastructure in place to handle that. And that's what Orion is trying to do. Handling a lot of this traffic, a lot of our institutions that we currently have in the last year or in the very near future, as a result of our backbone upgrade capability, a lot of institutions have been upgrading to 10 gigabits per second. As you can see, a lot of universities driving that, GTA Net, Large Net, which is in London. But you can also see in there the Peel District School Board and the Toronto District School Board upgrading. They're some of the biggest traffic users in the province. and how do we manage that diversity between the universities and the school boards? You know, they're about a quarter each of our traffic. How are we going to manage that and where they're going with online learning and experiential learning? So the Nebula. So we created the ORION Nebula about 3 years ago, which is our cloud. So and it's trying to address the issue of we've got this infrastructure, and how do we provide, not us necessarily directly, but provide access to cloud services, so above net services, right? Cloud-like applications, every one of our applications we put on have been desired by our users. We've been working with world-class vendors to help provide these services. We don't do it ourselves. We put a vendor on our network. The example does data backup, disaster recovery, email systems. So that's all been at a request of a university or a college. We put them on our network. That means the access to that cloud is through our network, a reliable network, and they're not paying for the communications costs. Remember, if you back up, every byte you back up, you're paying for the backup itself, but you're also paying for the transmission of that byte through the internet usually. If both parties are on the ORION network, there's no data transmission costs. It's already embedded in the user fees you pay. So that makes a huge advantage to helping grow and open the cloud for our university stakeholders. Why cloud? Everyone knows, right? Helps possibly reduce costs, the choice, flexibility, dynamic access, current, allows you to current applications. Lots of reasons why. If you don't do it right, it can be disastrous, and there's a lot of reasons and ways you've got to manage going to the cloud effectively. But as I said, you know, most of you are going to be using cloud in one way or another. We're here to help make that a little easier. If there's some particular companies or applications you need on the net, we'd be glad to talk to you about it. And it's been a 3-year process for us, an experimental process as we try to develop this, and our users grow and grow. And you know, the colleges, for example, have just approached this as a shared services model. Collectively, it's 24 colleges in Ontario. Love to work with the universities to do the same thing in Ontario. Some of the services we're providing: internet connectivity, data backup and recovery, co-location, video conferencing, educational content, data delivery, last mile connectivity, shared services. Others, if there's others that you want to add to the list, love to talk with you, see what we can do. Those are our current Nebula partners. So those are all the companies that are on our network right now that provide services over our network, and our institutions can go and talk to those guys, do a deal, and all your traffic's automatically routed over the network. Nice collection to start with. If there's more, love to talk to you. High profile, some of them are small, very specific applications that an organization has asked for us to put on. There's one more partner I'd like to put on there called IBM. You know, we have to, a little talk. Last slide is, as I mentioned, thank you. Last slide is, what are we doing with the Ontario government, right? So we've had no government funding, and yet we engage with all these institutions. So what are we going to do with our network to help Ontario? Because they're really challenged, and as well as our users. And there's a two-sided story to this. So the Ministry of Research and Innovations asked us, said, you know what? They've looked at all the research across the province and realized last mile connectivity is a big challenge for the institutions and the cost associated with it. So they've asked us to look at what are the last mile costs with our institutions. A lot of our universities, we have POPs right inside them. So York University, U of T, we've got partnerships with, Guelph, et cetera. We've got a POP right inside. So the last mile connectivity is like 3 feet long, right? Or sometimes it's building to building. But how do we help the rest of them, right? Because again, it's not just a single institution anymore. It's research that's going across institutions, across from colleges to universities. Sheridan College doing research with Ryerson or George Brown in digital media. You've got universities working with health research right across this province, or high performance computing. How do we address all of the institutions' last mile issues? High performance computing research Ontario, from research and innovation, we talked a bit about that. ORION's role in helping that, because again, we connect them all, right? So how do they build an infrastructure that's necessary for them from a digital computing standpoint, but communications, whether it's data or access to computing cycles, is really important. So how do we help provide the infrastructure and plan for that? Remember, we got to plan for this. For us to do an upgrade, you know, our last upgrade, we had to plan 3 years in advance. We're already planning for the next one. Right? As I said, we're testing 400 gigabits. What does that mean? Because when these things go on, people expect, you know, I'm going to attach another appliance. I expect the electricity to be there to do that. They expect the bandwidth to be there to do that. Digital media network. So we got a lot of digital media going on in Ontario, particularly in the Toronto area. A lot of small companies. How do we hook them together, connect them to high performance computing research capability, enable them to do jointly to do gaming or post-production, animation, whatever the case is. They have really challenged by these organizations because they have a little slice of doing a digital part of a movie, right? They each have a little capability, but they have to transmit these huge data sets or access data backup or supercomputer capability, right? How do we network them together? And they also work with the colleges and the universities to do their research. What's the next coming down next down the pipe? So how do we enable all of that as part of the economic backbone? The government of Ontario is doing a revamp of its government services network, and they're looking at some major providers, right? So a lot of big companies, as you can imagine who they are bidding for what the backbone is. The government of services says, Orion's got some stuff here. How can we use that as well to provide services to the government, but also them transmitting information to the universities, as institutions or colleges, et cetera. So we're part of that. We actually sit in the advisory council for the Ontario government on where government services are going to go on that perspective. K-12 network, so the Ministry of Education has actually asked us and said there are actually 5,000 schools in Ontario. We connect 32 school boards of the 72, but they said there's 5,000 schools. We can't do online learning, experiential learning, until every single school is connected. How do we do that? Orion, can you help us do that? So that's what we're engaged with the Ministry of Education, is also how to start planning and helping support them in doing that. Because they want to go all the way from K to university in their education programs, right? It's not just this sector and this sector and this sector. And how do we get it all together? A huge challenge. We're not going to do it alone. Where's the funding coming from? Don't know yet, but at least we're starting the process, which is really, really important. Last one is last two is e-health network. So we actually have more health research traffic on our network in Ontario than the Ontario e-health network has on health records. A lot of their network is at capacity because of hospitals using it for internet or for other research capabilities. How do we transfer that research stuff off the health network and onto our network to help them? And it also helps grow the footprint, right? We've got more POPs to connect to. Both are very secure. How do we do that together, right? No point in having separate networks. Let's work in collaboration. So what can we do there? Finally, the colleges services, the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities. All the colleges in Ontario are basically owned by the province of Ontario. Although they're separate institutions, they're owned by the province of Ontario. And collectively, they're working together on what are our shared services. Come to Orion and said, can you help us? Again, you know, would love to work with universities on the same challenges, right? Now, we're not going to do it alone, but how do we help in the process? So that's a picture where we are. And with vision, collaboration, and creativity, our possibilities are infinite in what we can do in this network and help everyone else. So thanks very much. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question on the Nebula.
Yeah.
That you've got.
Yeah.
Did they deal with the last mile itself, like to get connectivity?
So a lot of them are Toronto Front Street, right? So we meet in the Meet Me room, right? Right there. And some of them, like Bell, for example, we've done a deal with Bell to connect their Bell data center to our network, right? So there are many ways that we can skin that cat, right? So, and there are other ones that have. We've just done some interesting things with our Bell maintenance agreement, et cetera, that allow us to connect to providers outside of the province. So many ways we can look at the problem. Yeah. Yes?
I'm interested in the cloud services, and I attended a talk this morning with someone from Severa.
Yeah.
Who's providing actual cloud services to
Sorry.
University of Alberta
Yeah.
institutions. But when I hear talk today, I don't get the sense that you have the intention of providing actual cloud service with rooms full of servers and things like that that I can be able to access. Is that correct?
Not at the current time. And we'd love to talk about doing those things. I mean, we have some servers for some organizations at a very small level, testing those things out. For us to actually manage and build that hardware, is that the most effective way to do it, right? Cybera's got some great example in which they've gotten partnership with IBM to put in a cloud infrastructure through it was VCL probably you were attending, right?
It was actually a Moodle session.
Oh, a Moodle session, okay. And Cybera's got some great examples in which they've helped with shared resources in the University of Alberta, one particular, and how do they grow that across the province. Excellent ideas. We've been talking with Cybera and how we can model that here, but we're driven by our users. So if our users say, university comes and says, you know, or two universities would love to come and say, how do we manage, ORION can help us with that? At a bigger scale, love to talk to them on doing that. But we've done a couple of co-locations with some organizations. TFO, so the French television in Ontario, we've host their capability. Ministry of Natural Resources with some capability we host. Two of our institutions actually do shared resources between them. The big school boards in Ontario, 3 of them have come to ask and say, can we build a data center for them? In working with the Ontario government. That's about the biggest thing that we're looking at. Love to look at the opportunities. We've got 3 big vendors in the United States who build massive data centers have come up and said, you know what, we'd love to build a research and education data center right in Toronto to service exactly the things you're talking about. Would ORION love to run the thing for us?
Well, there's an IBM that's important. IBM got something.
Yep, so we're in talks with connecting the IBM research data center to the ORION network. We upgraded our Berry Pop to do exactly that. It's like, how do we do the last mile, right? That's the challenges. So anybody want to talk to us about it? We'd love to see how we can help, right? And we may not be the guys to do it, but we may be able to point in the right direction to enable that. Early stages. Other questions? Yeah.
You talked a lot about being driven by the needs of the users
Yeah.
and all the extreme data and research side. How does that relationship or that communication channel work between ORION and the research community on the work that they're doing and the infrastructure that they have? Is that through like the research office, central IT? Is that with the research directly? How does that work?
That's a great question. Some of the researchers just phone us up and say, hey, can we have some bandwidth capability? And we say, sure, not a problem. Put the structure in place. It's easy, not a challenge. Doesn't need to involve the other organizations. We let them know what's going on, but doesn't necessarily need to involve. If it involves at a higher level, the VPs of research, for example, we'll try to do something with them. There's always a challenge between the VPs of research and the CIOs and communicating between the two of them. We'll try to keep the best informed as we can, both sides. I can't fix the internal communications of a university sometimes, and it may come from the CIO themselves, right? And some of the small universities most often, because they don't have the capability themselves to do it, they'll phone us up and we'll put a group of players together to see what we can do. So there's no answer to your question. It can come from anywhere, right? Yeah. So. Yeah. Excellent.